Corruption Watch released a report on corruption in some areas of the education sector in South Africa. The anti-graft organization says this is despite policy and legislature interventions aimed at promoting equal access to education. The report reveals that over 3,000 reports on corruption in education were received between 2012 and 2021. Let's take a look at the report. We're joined by Melusi Ncala from Corruption Watch. Thank you very much for availing yourself this afternoon. How and why was this data collected?
Good afternoon, Dudu, and good afternoon to Newzroom Afrika viewers. We are an organization that encourages members of the public to blow the whistle on corruption. And these reports, as you've indicated, came in a 10-year period. And what also necessitated this report, apart from us releasing sectoral reports as we have in the past few years, is that we've done extensive work looking at particularly corruption in schools. And we then felt that it was necessary to also just highlight other interventions or other areas perhaps where we've been receiving whistleblower accounts.
Let's highlight those areas. So the report represents the voices of 3,667 learners, students, mothers and fathers and the elderly alike. When we take a look at employment irregularities, you highlight there's three hotspots: Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Cape, with employment irregularities accounting for 12.1% of corruption. What are we talking about there?
When we talk about employment irregularities, we're talking about people having to pay bribes to get jobs. In some instances, we're also talking about sextortion, which is a form of corruption in which powerful people or people in authority soliciting sexual favors from either women and other vulnerable groups. And it also just generally speaks to the flouting of recruitment processes.
You also have highlighted how some students are forced into sexual activity with educators, or they are solicited by these educators. What did the report find there?
Yeah, this is across the board in schools as well as TVET colleges and CETA institutions, where students would be forced to sleep with teachers or people in authority, administrators, for example, to get higher grades. This has been something that we've picked up over the years, and we have continuously shone the spotlight on this and even brought it to the attention of authorities.
So that abuse of authority accounting for 14.2% of corruption. There's also misappropriation of resources, taking the highest percentage at 43%. Quite worrying.
Yes, this is the theft of funds as well as misuse or abuse of resources. I mean, if we have to talk about corruption in terms of small scale, I guess we can talk about how teachers and other administrators steal stationery and books meant for children, but it can also be as big as principals and SGB members in some instances colluding to siphon millions of rands when it comes to service provisions. So it's widespread, it's across the board. It also happens in TVET colleges with them working alongside municipal officials in some instances as well.
And corruption at CETAs has actually forced students to quit due to a lack of stipends and resources?
Yes. What's worrying about this is that when we think about corruption, or at least corruption in the education sector, is that it's the poorest of the poor. The most vulnerable people in our communities go to these institutions hoping to get better opportunities, be it for employment or just to make a basic living wherever they find themselves. So in some situations, some of these institutions, CETA institutions, will shortchange students or not even give them their money. And when they want to query this, they are forced out of programs, told that they are asking too many questions, and what do they know?
I mean, essentially, then what, right? So you've got this report that you've been conducting over a period of 10 years, and it would seem that these problems that plague these institutions of learning are recurring. Most worryingly also, the trend that seems to be continuing is the soliciting of sexual favors in order for students to make the grade. Then what?
Well, essentially, this is indicative of government's failure to actually deal with corruption decisively and conclusively. For example, in 2015, we published a report called Loss of Principle, in which we highlighted several investigations. We had assurances from government back then already that they would look into these matters and hold those who are implicated accountable. To date, nothing substantive has actually happened. Instead, they've got this so-called rotational system where perhaps a principal that is implicated in corruption and is suspended, that person will be placed in a different institution. So then it begs the question, how serious does government take the issue of corruption?
How then does your report help, or your reporting help? I guess just asking in terms of accountability, yes, government does need to take note of this, but are we laying ducks here? Is there nothing that you and I can do?
Definitely. I mean, it's high time that we perhaps up the ante. It's time for a resounding call to say that we as the people have had enough in terms of this, and hence, as a result, apart from the interventions that we've had in the previous years, where we've conducted financial literacy training and anti-corruption